Sometimes the most dangerous lie is the one written in perfect silence. The pen hovered just above the contract, a $200 million deal waiting for a single signature to change everything. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light across polished marble as the room held its breath. Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid sat at the center, calm, composed, a man who had signed deals that shape cities. Across from him, Daniel Brooks leaned back in his chair, confidence etched into every movement, his tailored suit sharp, his watch ticking like a quiet countdown. Everything was ready. Everything was certain. Or so he thought. Emily Carter stood a few feet away, a tray balanced in her hands, unnoticed like she had always been. A waitress. Just another quiet presence moving between power and money, refilling glasses no one remembered asking for. Her eyes, however, were not on the table. They were on the contract. Still, focused, listening to something no one else could hear. A murmur earlier. A phrase spoken too quickly. Arabic. Not modern. Older. Legal. Precise. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray. She had heard that tone before. Years ago. In a room where people didn't smile. Where signatures cost more than money. The Sheikh adjusted the document, scanning the final page. His pen touched the paper. Daniel's lips curved just slightly. Victory already assumed. Around them, executives sat still, silent, watching the moment unfold. No one questioned it. No one looked twice at the waitress. And that was exactly why she could see what they couldn't. A single clause. Buried. Cleverly placed. Invisible to anyone not trained to look for it. Emily took one step forward. Quiet. Careful. Almost hesitant. But her eyes had already decided. She leaned in, just enough for only one man to hear her. Her voice barely above a breath. And then in flawless Arabic she whispered, "Don't sign this, transfers everything." The pen stopped. Not slowly. Instantly. The Sheikh's hand froze midair. His eyes lifted, sharp now, no longer calm. The room shifted. Not loudly, but completely. Daniel straightened, confusion flashing across his face for the first time. "What did she just say?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the silence. Emily didn't move, didn't step back. She simply placed the tray down with quiet precision and pointed to a single line in the contract. "That clause," she said softly, her tone steady, "it's not a partnership." The Sheikh lowered his pen, slowly, deliberately, and began to read again, this time in his own language. The silence did not break all at once. It stretched thin and fragile like glass about to crack. Sheikh Khalid's eyes moved slowly across the page, no longer skimming, no longer trusting the translation provided minutes earlier. Each word now carried weight. Each phrase felt different. His fingers tightened slightly around the pen, then loosened as he lowered it onto the table without a sound. Daniel Brooks leaned forward, a controlled smile still on his face, but it no longer reached his eyes. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice smooth, practiced, but just a fraction too quick. No one answered him. Not immediately. The Sheikh read the line again. Then again. The same clause Emily had pointed to. Hidden in plain sight. Written in formal legal Arabic, the kind rarely used unless there was something to conceal behind elegance. Around the table, executives shifted in their seats, exchanging brief glances, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. The air felt heavier now, as if the room itself understood something had changed. Emily stood still, hands relaxed at her sides, her expression calm, almost distant, as though she had already stepped outside the moment. She did not look at Daniel. She did not look at anyone. Only at the contract. Waiting. The Sheikh finally looked up, his gaze no longer warm, no longer diplomatic. It was precise. "This clause," he said slowly in English, his accent measured, "transfers controlling interest upon signature." The words landed softly, but the effect was immediate. Daniel's smile disappeared. "That is not correct," he replied, sharper now. "It outlines a strategic partnership. That is what we discussed." Emily's eyes flickered for just a second, not with doubt but recognition. She had heard that exact sentence before. Years ago. Same tone. Same confidence. The Sheikh turned the page back, tracing the line with his finger. "It is written clearly," he continued. this time switching briefly into Arabic under his breath, confirming each term for himself. Ownership, not partnership. A quiet murmur moved through the room. Not loud, but enough. Daniel straightened, his jaw tightening, calculation replacing charm. There must be a misunderstanding in translation, he said, glancing briefly at his legal team. No one spoke. No one moved to defend him, because now they were reading, too, and seeing it. Emily took a slow breath, almost unnoticed, her voice gentle but steady as she spoke again. The phrasing is intentional, she said. It uses an older structure, one that sounds cooperative, but legally binds control. Daniel turned to her fully now, his gaze sharp, searching. Who are you? He asked, not with curiosity, but with something closer to suspicion. Emily met his eyes for the first time. Calm, unshaken. Someone who reads carefully, she replied. The Sheikh closed the contract. Not forcefully. Just enough to end the moment that had almost happened. He looked at Daniel, then back at Emily, studying her as if she were no longer invisible. You understood this immediately? He asked. Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because she did not know the answer, but because she knew what it would reveal. Yes, she said quietly. The Sheikh nodded once slowly. Respect. Clear. Undeniable. And in that moment the balance in the room shifted completely. Not with noise, not with confrontation, but with silence that now belonged to her. No one reached for their glass anymore. Even the soft clink of cutlery had disappeared, as if the room itself refused to interrupt what was unfolding. Daniel Brooks leaned back slowly, but the ease he had carried into the meeting was gone, replaced by something sharper, more controlled. He studied Emily in silence, not as a waitress now, but as a variable he had not accounted for. You read legal Arabic, he said, his tone quieter, measured. It was not a question. Emily did not respond immediately. Her gaze shifted briefly to the contract, then back to the Sheikh, as if choosing carefully where her words belonged. I understand enough, she said. The understatement hung in the air, almost deliberate. Sheikh Khalid's fingers rested lightly on the closed document, his attention fixed on her. Enough to stop a $200 million mistake, he replied. There was no anger in his voice, only clarity, and something else. Curiosity. Around the table, the executives had begun to distance themselves without moving. Eyes lowered, shoulders stiff. The confidence that had filled the room earlier had thinned into uncertainty. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, but he forced a small, controlled breath. If there has been an error, we will correct it, he said, turning toward his legal team, though none of them met. His eyes. These things happen in complex international agreements. Emily watched him quietly. Not challenging, not accusing, just observing, the way she had been from the beginning. And that was what unsettled him the most. No, she said softly. The word was not loud, but it carried. Daniel's head turned back toward her, slower this time. This does not happen by accident. Another silence. Thicker now. The Sheikh's gaze moved between them, weighing not just the words but the space between them. Explain, he said. Emily hesitated again, but only briefly. Her eyes lowered to the contract as she spoke, her voice calm, almost detached. The clause is structured to appear standard under a quick read, she said. But the verb form shifts ownership upon execution. It is not a translation issue. It is design. Daniel's fingers tapped once against the table, a small, controlled movement, but the only sign that the pressure had reached him. You are making a serious claim, he said. Based on what exactly? Emily looked up at him then, fully this time. There was no hesitation in her expression now, only certainty. Experience, she answered. The word landed differently than the others. Not defensive, not emotional, just factual. The Sheikh leaned back slightly, studying her more closely. Where did you learn this kind of language? He asked. It was a simple question, but it carried weight, because it did not match the uniform she wore. Emily's hand brushed lightly against the edge of the table, grounding herself in something physical before she spoke. In rooms like this, she said quietly, the answer was enough. And not enough at all. Daniel watched her carefully, something shifting behind his eyes as pieces began to rearrange. This was no coincidence. No random interruption. There was a history here. One he had not seen. One he had not been told. The Sheikh nodded slowly, then turned his attention back to the contract, tapping it once with his finger. Then we will not sign, he said. Simple. Final. The decision settled over the room like a closing door. And in that stillness, Emily Carter, the waitress no one had noticed, had just changed the outcome of everything. The decision did not echo. It settled. Quiet. Heavy. Final. No one spoke for several seconds, as if they were waiting for someone to undo what had just happened. But no one did. Daniel Brooks slowly clasped his hands together on the table, his posture straight, composed again, but something underneath had shifted. The control he had walked in with was no longer absolute. Then we will review the document and reconvene, he said, his tone steady, almost neutral, as if the situation were still within his design. But his eyes did not leave Emily. Not once. Sheikh Khalid did not respond immediately. He simply nodded once, then closed the folder completely, sliding it a few inches away from him, a small gesture that carried more weight than any raised voice could have. The deal was no longer alive. Around them, chairs creaked softly as executives adjusted, unsure whether the meeting was over or just broken. Emily reached for the tray again, lifting it with the same quiet precision she had shown before, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. She turned slightly, ready to step away, to return to the role everyone had assigned her. Invisible. Temporary. Replaceable. Wait. The word stopped her. Not loud, but firm. She paused, her back still to the table for a brief second before turning again. The Sheikh was looking directly at her now, not as a customer looks at staff, but as one decision-maker looks at another. You saw this immediately, he said. Before anyone else. Emily held his gaze, her expression calm. Yes. He studied her for a moment longer, then asked, and you chose to speak. It was not a question about language. It was a question about risk, about consequence, about why someone with nothing to gain would interrupt something this large. Emily's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the tray. Just slightly. Someone needed to, she replied. Simple. Direct. No explanation offered. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose, a faint sound but enough to draw attention. You realize, he said, his voice lower now, controlled in a different way, that you have just interfered with a negotiation that took months to build. Emily turned her eyes toward him, not defensive, not apologetic, just present. If it was built on something false, she said, then it was not real to begin with. The words landed softly, but they did not leave room for argument. Daniel did not respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying her again, but this time with something closer to focus than irritation. As if he were trying to place her, to remember something just out of reach. You said you learned this in rooms like this, he continued. Which rooms? Emily hesitated, not out of fear, but because the answer mattered more than the question. Her gaze drifted for a brief moment to the contract, then to the reflection of the chandelier in the polished table surface. The kind where no one admits mistakes, she said quietly, and no one forgets them either. A subtle shift moved through the room again. Not tension this time. Recognition. The Sheikh's expression softened slightly, not with emotion but with understanding. He had been in those rooms. He knew exactly what she meant. Daniel, however, went still. Completely still. Because something in that answer was no longer unfamiliar. It was specific. Too specific. His eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger but in realization. As if a memory, long buried under success and certainty, had just been pulled into the light. And for the first time since she spoke, he did not see a waitress standing in front of him. He saw a question he had not asked years ago, and the answer standing quietly in front of him now. Daniel Brooks did not speak right away. He just looked at her, really looked this time, as if peeling away the uniform, the tray, the quiet posture, searching for something that did not fit the version of reality he had built. The room remained still, but the silence had changed again. It was no longer tension. It was anticipation. Emily felt it, the weight of attention shifting toward her, but she did not move. She had been here before. Not this exact room. Not these exact faces. But this moment. The moment when truth arrived too early for comfort. How long have you been working here? Daniel asked suddenly. The question felt out of place. Smaller than everything else that had just happened. But it was not small at all. It was his way of measuring her. Of finding a gap in her story. Emily answered without hesitation. 3 months. Daniel nodded slowly, as if confirming something only he understood. And before that? His voice was quieter now. Careful. The executives around the table shifted again, sensing that the conversation had moved somewhere deeper, somewhere less visible. Emily's gaze dropped briefly to the polished surface of the table, where the reflection of the chandelier trembled slightly with every subtle movement in the room. Before that, she said, I worked somewhere else. It was not an answer. Not really. Daniel almost smiled. Not with amusement. With recognition. You are very precise with your words, he said. Emily looked back at him. So are you. For a brief second something passed between them. Not hostility. Not respect. Something older. The Sheikh watched the exchange carefully, his expression unreadable but attentive, as if he were listening to a language beyond English. Miss Carter, he said gently, drawing her attention back. You have already done more than anyone in this room today. I would like to understand why. Emily turned toward him, her posture still composed, but her eyes softer now. Not guarded. Just tired. Because I have seen what happens when no one says anything, she replied. The words were quiet, but they carried history. Daniel's fingers stilled completely on the table. That sentence. That tone. It was no longer unfamiliar. It was a memory. Faint. Incomplete. But real. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lower than before. Where? He asked. Just one word. But it held everything. Emily did not answer immediately. The room waited. Even the air seemed to pause. Then she spoke, not looking at him this time, but somewhere just past him, as if the answer did not belong to the present. In a deal that should have never been signed, she said. A quiet ripple moved through the room. Daniel's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for those paying attention to notice. That happens more often than you think, he said, trying to keep his tone steady. Emily shook her head slightly. Not like that one. The certainty in her voice cut through any attempt to minimize it. The Sheikh leaned forward now, interest sharpening. What happened? He asked. Emily's hand tightened around the tray again, just slightly, the only sign that the memory still had weight. Someone trusted the wrong translation, she said. And by the time they realized, everything was already gone. Silence followed. Deep. Heavy. Not uncomfortable. Just undeniable. Daniel's gaze did not leave her face. Because now the memory was no longer faint. It was forming. Piece by piece. And somewhere in that memory there had been a contract. A clause. A warning that no one had listened to. Until now. Daniel. Brooks did not blink. Not when she finished speaking. Not when the silence deepened. It was as if something inside him had finally aligned. A pattern he had ignored years ago now returning with unsettling clarity. The room faded for him, not physically but mentally, as his focus narrowed to one thing. One memory. A deal. Smaller than this one. Less visible. But just as precise. He leaned forward slowly, his voice no longer carrying authority, but something closer to restraint. 5 years ago, he said, almost to himself, a joint venture in Dubai. No one else in the room reacted, but Emily's fingers tightened again just slightly. That was enough. Daniel saw it. There was a clause, he continued, his eyes locked on her now. Buried. Similar structure. We lost controlling interest within 48 hours. The executives around the table exchanged quick glances. Some of them remembered. Others had only heard about it. Costly mistake. One that had been quietly rewritten as a strategic exit. Emily did not look away. It was not a mistake, she said softly. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. Not this time. Someone flagged it, she added. Before the signing. The words landed carefully. Measured. Daniel's expression shifted again, slower now, as if he were walking through the memory step by step. There was a junior analyst, he said. Temporary. She raised a concern. His voice lowered further. We did not listen. The air in the room grew still again, but this time it was different. It was not tension. It was realization. Emily nodded once. Small. Almost imperceptible. But it was enough. Daniel exhaled, a quiet breath that carried more weight than any argument he had made that day. You, he said. Not a question. A conclusion. Emily did not confirm it with words. She did not need to. Her silence said enough. The Sheikh watched the exchange with growing interest, his gaze moving between them as the unseen history unfolded in front of him. You warned him before, he said, directing the statement toward Emily. She turned slightly toward him, her expression unchanged. I tried, she replied. Daniel's hand moved across the table, not aggressively, not sharply, just a slow motion as if grounding himself in the present. Why were you not heard? He asked. The question was not defensive. It was something else. Something closer to regret. Emily's eyes flickered briefly, not with emotion but with memory. Because I was not supposed to understand, she said. The simplicity of it cut deeper than anything else she had said. Daniel looked down at the contract in front of him, then back at her, seeing now not just the present moment, but the cost of the past one. And now? He asked quietly. Emily met his gaze. Calm, steady, unmoved by status or consequence. Now I am not asking for permission to speak. The words settled into the room, not as a challenge, but as a truth no one could deny. The Sheikh leaned back slightly, a faint, thoughtful expression crossing his face. Interesting, he said softly, because in this room filled with power, contracts, and control, the only person who had changed the outcome was the one no one had planned for. The word permission lingered in the air long after Emily finished speaking, not as a challenge, but as a quiet shift in gravity. No one interrupted her. No one dismissed her. And that alone changed everything. Daniel Brooks leaned back slowly, his eyes still fixed on her, but no longer searching for flaws. He was searching for truth. 5 years, he said quietly, almost measuring the time out loud. You walked away after that deal. Emily did not answer immediately. Her gaze moved briefly across the room, not to the people but to the space itself, as if remembering how rooms like this used to feel. I did not walk away, she said. I was removed. The distinction was small in words, but not in meaning. A subtle shift moved through the executives. Some looked down. Others remained still, unwilling to acknowledge what that implied. Daniel's expression tightened slightly. Because you spoke up, he said. Again, not a question. Emily nodded once. Because I was not supposed to be right. The sentence settled heavier than anything before it. The Sheikh's fingers tapped lightly against the closed contract, a thoughtful rhythm, his gaze steady on her. And yet, he said, you chose to speak again today. Emily's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile but something close. Some things are easier the second time, she replied. Daniel let out a quiet breath, one that carried something unfamiliar. Not frustration, not control, something closer to acceptance. He looked down at the contract, then back at her. You understood the risk, he said. Intervening like that, in front of everyone. Emily met his eyes. I understood the cost of staying silent more. The words did not rise. They did not push. They simply existed. And that made them impossible to ignore. For a moment no one spoke. The room, once filled with authority and certainty, now held something else entirely. Reflection. The Sheikh leaned forward slightly, his voice calm, but with a new layer of respect. Miss Carter, he said, you prevented a decision that would have had consequences far beyond this table. Emily inclined her head slightly. I only pointed to what was already there. That, the Sheikh replied, is what most people fail to do. Daniel's gaze lowered briefly, then returned to her. You were right then, he said. And you are right now. There was no hesitation in his voice. No defense. Just acknowledgement. It was the first time he had said it. The first time he had allowed it to exist without explanation. Emily did not react the way most would expect. She did not smile. She did not soften. She simply nodded once, accepting the words without needing them. Because for her, this was not about being proven right. It never had been. It was about something quieter. Something steadier. Truth. The Sheikh stood slowly, the movement drawing every eye in the room. He adjusted his cuff, then looked directly at Emily. "You will join us for the next review," he said. It was not a suggestion. It was a decision. A shift in position. In status. In recognition. Daniel did not object. Not this time. He simply watched her, as if understanding that something had already changed beyond his control. Emily hesitated for the first time since she spoke, not out of uncertainty, but because she understood what that invitation meant. She glanced once at the tray in her hands, then back at the table. A quiet pause. Then she placed the tray down. Gently, deliberately, and in that simple movement, the role she had been given no longer defined her. The tray touched the table with a soft, almost inaudible sound, but in that moment it echoed louder than anything else in the room. Emily Carter straightened slightly, her hands now free, her posture unchanged, yet entirely different. She was no longer passing through the room. She was part of it. Sheikh Khalid gestured subtly toward the chair beside him. "Please," he said. It was not a formality. It was an invitation with weight. Emily paused for a fraction of a second, her eyes moving across the table, not seeking approval, not asking permission, just observing the shift that had already taken place. Then she stepped forward and took the seat. Calm. Measured. As if she had always belonged there. The executives exchanged glances, some uncertain, some quietly impressed, others still trying to understand how the balance of the room had changed so completely in a matter of minutes. Daniel Brooks remained still, watching her sit, his expression unreadable, but his attention unwavering. "We will review the document again," the Sheikh said, opening the contract slowly, this time turning it so both he and Emily could see it clearly. Line by line. Emily nodded once, her focus already on the page. The room leaned in, not physically but in attention. Even those who had read the contract before now watched differently, as if they expected to see something they had missed. The Sheikh pointed to the clause again. "Explain it," he said. Emily did not rush. Her finger traced just beneath the line, not touching the ink, but close enough to follow its structure. "The wording appears neutral," she began, her voice steady, clear, easy to follow. "But the verb used here does not indicate shared authority. It indicates transfer upon execution. It is written to be overlooked unless you are reading for intent, not translation." The words settled into the room, and this time no one dismissed them. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his eyes following the line as she spoke, his mind recalibrating, adjusting, seeing what he had not seen before. "And the rest of the document?" the Sheikh asked. Emily turned the page carefully. "Consistent," she said. "The structure supports the same outcome. It is not one mistake. It is a pattern." A quiet shift moved through the legal team. One of them adjusted his glasses, another flipped through his own copy, faster now, searching, confirming. The confidence that had filled the room earlier had been replaced by something sharper. Awareness. Daniel's voice came again, but different this time. Lower. Focused. "If this was intentional," he said, "then someone expected it to go unnoticed." Emily did not look up. "They counted on it," she replied. The simplicity of her answer left no room for doubt. The Sheikh leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful, then glanced toward Daniel. And they were almost correct. Daniel did not respond. Not immediately. His gaze remained on the document, but his thoughts were no longer confined to the page. He was thinking about the system, the process, the assumption that had allowed this to happen twice. Emily closed the folder gently, her hand resting on top of it for a brief second before she withdrew it. "It is not just the contract," she said quietly. "It is the speed." The Sheikh's eyes narrowed slightly. "Explain." Emily met his gaze. "The faster the decision," she said, "the less likely someone reads what they are not expecting to find." Silence followed. Not empty, not uncertain, just clear. Because in that moment everyone in the room understood something simple. This was never about language alone. It was about attention. And the one person who had been invisible had been the only one truly paying it. The word speed lingered longer than anyone expected. It was simple, almost obvious, yet no one had said it before. The room did not move forward. It paused. Daniel Brooks leaned back slowly, his eyes no longer fixed on the contract, but on the pattern Emily had just revealed. "We pushed this deal through in 72 hours, he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. One of his executives shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at his notes. The timeline had been a point of pride just moments ago. Now it felt like a flaw. The Sheikh rested his hand lightly on the table, his gaze steady. "Why the urgency?" he asked. The question was calm but direct. Daniel did not answer immediately. He knew the answer. Everyone in the room did. Speed created advantage. Speed limited scrutiny. Speed closed deals before doubt could grow. But now, in this silence, that advantage looked different. Emily spoke before anyone else could. "Because urgency replaces clarity," she said. Her tone was not critical. It was observational. When something feels immediate, people focus on outcome, not structure. The Sheikh nodded slowly, absorbing the thought. "And those who design these contracts understand that," he said. Emily met his gaze. "They depend on it." The legal team had stopped pretending now. Papers were being reviewed again, more carefully, more slowly. One executive cleared his throat softly. "There are at least 3 other clauses with similar phrasing," he said, his voice tight. "We did not flag them earlier." No one reacted with surprise. Not anymore. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, sharper now, more focused than before. "This was not an oversight," he said. "It was engineered." The word settled into the room with weight. Emily did not respond, but her silence confirmed it. The Sheikh leaned forward slightly, his fingers interlacing. "Then the question is not whether the contract is flawed," he said. "The question is who benefits from the flaw." The room shifted again, but this time the direction was clear. Attention moved outward, beyond the paper, beyond the table, toward intention. Daniel's gaze returned to Emily. "You saw this faster than anyone," he said. "Even knowing what to look for, it would take time." Emily's expression remained calm. "I was not looking for the obvious," she said. "I was looking for what did not match." The distinction was subtle, but powerful. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding now that the difference was not intelligence alone. It was perspective, training, experience built not from success but from consequences. The Sheikh studied her again, then asked, "If you had not been here today?" Emily did not hesitate. "You would have signed." The room went still again. Not because the answer was unexpected, but because it was true. Daniel exhaled quietly, the sound almost lost in the space. "And we would not have known," he said. Emily's eyes moved briefly to the contract, then back to him. Not immediately. The implication settled heavily. Loss does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it appears later. Hidden. Final. One of the executives closed his folder slowly, the sound soft but decisive. "We need to halt all related agreements," he said. "Not just this one." The Sheikh nodded once. "Agreed." Then his gaze returned to Emily, steady and clear. "You have changed the course of this negotiation," he said. Emily did not react. Not outwardly, because for her this was not about changing anything. It was about seeing it clearly before it was too late. And in a room full of people trained to move fast, she had done something far more difficult. She had slowed them down. The room did not return to what it was. Could not. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in the contract but in the way everyone was now thinking. Daniel Brooks rested his hands flat against the table, his posture steady, but no longer driven by urgency. For the first time he was not trying to close the deal. He was trying to understand it. "We assumed alignment," he said slowly, "because everything looked correct." Emily's eyes remained on the document, her voice calm. It was designed to look correct. The distinction was subtle, but it carried weight. The Sheikh nodded slightly, his expression thoughtful, then turned his attention toward Daniel. "Trust built on appearance is not trust," he said. Daniel accepted the statement without resistance. No, he replied quietly. It is assumption. Silence followed, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was deliberate, focused. One of the executives leaned forward, flipping through additional pages. If this structure appears in related agreements, he said, then this is part of a larger strategy. Emily did not look up. It usually is, she said. The word usually landed differently. It implied pattern, repetition, experience. Daniel's gaze sharpened again, but this time not with control, with realization. This is not the first time this group has done this, he said. Emily met his eyes briefly. No, she replied. It is just the first time you noticed in time. The truth in that sentence settled deeper than any accusation, because it was not said to blame. It was said to clarify. The Sheikh leaned back slightly, his fingers resting together, his voice measured. Then we are no longer reviewing a contract, he said. We are identifying intent. The room shifted again, but now with direction. The conversation had moved beyond correction. It had become strategy. Daniel turned toward his legal team. I want a full review of every clause, every variation, every prior agreement connected to this entity, he said. His voice was firm again, but no longer rushed. Controlled in a different way. Built on awareness instead of assumption. The team nodded immediately, already moving, already adjusting. Emily watched quietly, not intervening, not directing. She had already done what she needed to do. The rest belonged to them. The Sheikh's attention returned to her once more. You said you look for what does not match, he said. Emily inclined her head slightly. Yes. And what does not match here, he asked. Emily paused, her gaze returning to the contract, but this time not to a specific clause, to the whole structure, the flow, the tone, the confidence, she said. The answer caught the room off guard. The Sheikh's brow lowered slightly. Explain. Emily's voice remained steady. Everything in this document assumes it will not be questioned, she said. That level of certainty does not come from language. It comes from expectation. Daniel leaned forward slightly, understanding forming as she spoke. They expected us to move fast, he said. Emily nodded. And to trust the process. The words echoed quietly, because that was exactly what had happened. The Sheikh allowed a small pause, then closed the folder again, more decisively this time. Then we will change the process, he said. It was not a reaction. It was a shift in principle. Daniel looked at Emily once more. His expression no longer guarded, no longer distant. You did not just stop this deal, he said. You exposed how we make them. Emily held his gaze for a moment, then looked away, not out of discomfort, but because the answer was simple. It was already there, she said. You just did not see it yet. And in a room built on visibility, status, and control, the one thing that had mattered most had been hidden in plain sight all along. The room no longer felt like a place where decisions were made quickly. It felt like a place where decisions would now be questioned. Carefully. Thoroughly. And for the first time that shift did not slow the room down. It sharpened it. Daniel Brooks stood up slowly, not as a signal to end the meeting, but as a change in posture. A reset. His eyes moved across the table, briefly acknowledging his team, then returning to Emily. We built a system that rewards speed, he said, and overlooked precision. No one disagreed. No one tried to soften the statement, because it was no longer something to defend. It was something to understand. Emily remained seated, her posture calm, her presence steady, as if the attention around her did not belong to her at all. The Sheikh watched Daniel closely, then gave a slight nod, not of agreement but of recognition. Speed creates opportunity, he said, but it also creates openings. Daniel's expression shifted slightly. And we left too many of them unguarded, he replied. The admission did not weaken him, clarified him. The executives around the table straightened, their focus no longer scattered but aligned. One of them spoke carefully. We should audit every agreement from the last 5 years, he said. Not just for language but for structure. Daniel nodded once. Do it. The instruction was immediate, but this time it was not rushed. It was deliberate. The Sheikh's attention returned to Emily again, Not with curiosity now, but with something closer to evaluation. You see patterns others miss, he said. Emily shook her head slightly. I notice what others assume, she replied. The distinction was small, but it changed everything. Daniel walked slowly around the table, stopping a few feet from her, not above her, not over her, but level. You said you were removed, he said. After you warned us. Emily looked up at him, her expression unchanged. Yes. Why did you not fight it? He asked. It was not an accusation. It was a question about choice. About what someone does after being right and ignored. Emily paused for a moment, her eyes moving briefly toward the window where the city stretched out beyond the glass, distant and quiet. Because proving it later does not change what was already lost, she said. The words settled deeply. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just true. Daniel absorbed that in silence, then nodded slowly. And today, he asked. What changed? Emily met his gaze again, steady as before. I did not need to prove anything, she said. I just needed to stop it. The simplicity of her answer left no room for anything else. The Sheikh stood as well, his presence calm, composed, but carrying authority in a different way now. You did more than stop it, he said. You altered how we will approach every decision after this. Emily did not respond, because she understood something they were only beginning to realize. This was not about one contract. It was about a mindset, a pattern, a way of seeing that had been missing. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, We should have listened to you 5 years ago. Emily held his gaze, not with resentment, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. You are listening now, she replied. And in that moment it was enough. The room did not rush to the next step. It stayed in that moment, suspended between what had been and what would come next. Daniel Brooks remained standing, but the authority in his posture had softened into something more deliberate. Not weaker, just more aware. He glanced once at the contract, now closed, then back at Emily, as if measuring not her value, but the gap in his own judgment that had allowed this to happen twice. We built layers of review, he said slowly, and still missed the one thing that mattered. Emily's gaze rested on the table, her voice quiet but clear. You built layers to confirm what you expected, she said, not to challenge it. The distinction settled into the room like a final piece clicking into place. The Sheikh nodded slightly, his expression thoughtful. Expectation is efficient, he said, but it is also blinding. Daniel let out a slow breath, his eyes briefly closing, not in frustration but in acknowledgement. Then we changed that, he said. It was not a reaction. It was a decision. Immediate. Firm. This time rooted in something deeper than speed. One of the executives leaned forward, his tone more careful than before. We can restructure the review process, he suggested. Introduce independent language verification on all international agreements. Daniel shook his head slightly. That is a start, he said. But it is not enough. The room went still again, waiting. We do not just need new layers, he continued. We need different eyes. His gaze moved to Emily. Not commanding. Not transactional. Just clear. The meaning did not need to be spoken out loud. The Sheikh observed the exchange, then spoke calmly. Expertise is not always where you expect to find it, he said. Emily did not react. She had heard that before. Just not in rooms like this. Daniel stepped closer, but still kept a respectful distance, his voice lower now. You see what we do not, he said. Not because you are outside the system, but because you are not dependent on it. Emily looked up at him, her expression steady. I was part of it once, she said. Daniel nodded. And that is exactly why this matters. Silence followed, but this time it was not heavy. It was clear. The Sheikh stood fully, adjusting his jacket with quiet precision. Miss Carter, he said, if you are willing, I would like you to remain involved in this review. It was not framed as a favor. It was recognition. Emily's fingers rested lightly against the edge of the table, grounding herself in the present. She understood the offer. She understood the shift it represented. Not just for her. For the room. For the system they were beginning to question. On one condition, she said. The words were calm, but they carried weight. Both men looked at her attentive. We slow down, she continued. Every agreement. Every clause. No assumptions. The simplicity of the condition made it impossible to argue. The Sheikh nodded first. Agreed. Daniel followed without hesitation. Agreed. Emily held their gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod. Not as acceptance of authority, but as alignment. The room did not erupt. No one applauded. No one needed to, because something far more important had happened. The system had not just been corrected. It had been redefined. And it started with the one person no one had planned to listen to. The agreement did not resume that day. It did not need to. What mattered had already been decided, not on paper but in perspective. The room slowly returned to motion, chairs shifting, documents being gathered, voices lowering into quiet conversations, but something remained different. It was not the outcome. It was the awareness that now followed every action. Emily Carter stood up from her chair without ceremony, her movements as calm as when she had first entered the room carrying a tray no one noticed. The difference was not in what she did. It was in how the room now saw her. Daniel Brooks watched her for a moment, not with curiosity anymore, but with something steadier. Respect, quiet and unspoken. We will have the revised documents ready within 48 hours, he said to the Sheikh, his tone measured, controlled, but no longer rushed. The Sheikh nodded once. And we will review them properly, he replied. A faint pause followed, then he added, together. It was a simple word, but it changed the dynamic entirely. Not authority, not hierarchy, alignment. Daniel inclined his head slightly, accepting the shift without resistance, because he understood now that control without clarity was fragile, and clarity had come from where he least expected it. Emily stepped back from the table, her hands resting naturally at her sides, her posture unchanged, grounded, composed. For a brief moment her eyes moved across the room, taking in the space, the people, the atmosphere that had once pushed her out without a second thought. Nothing about the room had changed physically, but everything about it had changed in meaning. The Sheikh approached her, his steps unhurried, his presence calm but deliberate. You did not raise your voice, he said. Yet everyone listened. Emily met his gaze, her expression neutral but thoughtful. You do not need to be loud when you are clear, she replied. The Sheikh allowed a small, approving nod. Clarity, he said softly, is rare. Daniel stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance, his voice quieter now than it had been all day. You said earlier that you were removed, he said. That you were not supposed to be right. Emily looked at him, not with challenge, not with emotion, just with honesty. Yes. Daniel held her gaze for a moment, then said, that will not happen again. It was not a promise of position. It was a recognition of value. Emily did not respond immediately, because she understood something deeper than what he was offering. This was not about being included. It was about being heard. And that had already happened. She gave a small nod, acknowledging the moment without holding on to it. Outside the tall windows, the city moved as it always did, fast, constant, unaware of the quiet shift that had taken place inside that room. Deals would continue. Contracts would be written. Decisions would be made. But something invisible had changed. Not in the system. In the people within it. Emily turned slightly, preparing to leave, her steps light, unhurried, the same as when she had entered. No announcement. No recognition needed. Just movement. And as she reached the door, Daniel's voice followed, not loud but enough. Emily. She paused just for a moment, then looked back. He held her gaze, then said only one thing. Thank you. No explanation. No elaboration. Just two words that carried more weight than anything else he had said that day. Emily gave a small nod, then turned and walked out, her presence fading into the quiet rhythm of the world beyond the room. And behind her, in a place built on power and speed, one truth remained, steady and undeniable. The loudest decisions had almost been made in silence, and it took a whisper to change them.